Hi, my name is Jane Helgeveld, and I am a Master of Divinity student at United Theological Seminary in New Brighton, Minnesota. I, this semester, am taking a class that's called Seasons and Celebrations in the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic Liturgical and Religious Years. And as it sounds, we are doing some comparison and contrast, but most of the comparisons between the three Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and some of the celebrations that are that may have some synergies between them. And so one of the books I was reading a few weeks back, The Jewish Holidays, which is a guide and commentary by Michael Strassfeld, was talking about the traditions behind the Jewish holiday of Shabbat. So basically what's happening here is that it is a celebration of the gift of the Torah. Now Pentecost is sometimes looked at as the birthday of the Christian church. So again, we're looking at kind of two different birthdays, two different commemorations of the beginnings of religious traditions. Now, what really got my attention was the next paragraph that says, yet a number of customs have arisen for Shabbat, the oldest of which are decorating of the synagogue and home with green plants, branches, and even trees, and the eating of dairy foods. Both are of obscure origin. So there are these traditions in Judaism for decorating one's home with green branches, which got me thinking about my own family. Now again, my name is Jane Helgeveld. I come from a line of Norwegians, obviously, with that last name. But on my mother's side, I come from Julianne and Alfred Schramm. My grandma, Julianne, grew up in a German-speaking and very faithful home of Julius and Friederike Diesterhoft. Now, my grandma Julianne told me a story once in passing about a tradition that they had when she was a child back in the early 1900s, where her father, Julius, would decorate the home with green branches on Pentecost. Now, I kind of filed that in the back of my mind and didn't really give it much thought. And then, unfortunately, my grandma passed away, and I got to the point where I was wondering a little bit more about this tradition. So when I read about the Jewish tradition happening at Pentecost, it got me wondering again about my own family. Grandma was the oldest of 12 children, and Emmanuel is about 14 years younger than she. However, he did remember this tradition. So this morning, which would be Saturday, May 5th, 2012, I called my great uncle Emmanuel and asked him a little bit about this tradition. Now, I wasn't able to record his voice, but I did try to capture as closely as I could what he was saying so that I could share it with you today. So, Emmanuel Diesterhoff's Pentecost memories go like this. I remember Dad getting up early Pentecost Sunday and cutting evergreen and cedar branches, and sometimes lilacs, and hanging the branches behind pictures in the kitchen and behind the curtains and other pictures in the house. It made the day special. I remember my sister Ruth didn't like it very much because she was the one that had to clean the house, and when the branches would dry out, it would make such a mess. And then he went on to talk about a little bit more about the tradition and where it came from. And he said, I think Dad brought it, that being the tradition of hanging branches, from the old country. Other people in our church were German too, so I suppose they did it. But I was a little kid, and I don't remember. I don't remember why we decorated with branches. I was a little kid, it was just what we did. You don't think to ask why, it's something you've always done. I did it myself for a year or two after I married, but then I kind of stopped. I think I stopped after my dad died. I don't recall my wife ever talking about it when she was a kid or not. And now Emmanuel is just about 90 years old today, so my grandma would have been well over 100. And then he went on to talk a little bit more about Pentecost that it was more than just a church service and decorating. He said Pentecost was a special thing, not as special as Easter, at least not for a kid. And what he was getting at there is that Easter kids, Easter baskets, so of course it's going to be more noteworthy as a child. Um, but he goes on to say, I'm not sure what it meant for the adults. And the tradition kind of went away as he got older. But then he talked about how on Pentecost Sunday, our pastor would preach in our church in West Lynn, but then the next day, which they called Pentecost Monday, their pastor would go to Acoma to preach, and the Acoma pastor would come to West Lynn. So on Pentecost Monday, they continued to celebrate Pentecost, and they had a pulpit exchange, which I found pretty interesting. Now, Emmanuel said I don't remember if we went to school on Monday or not. They went to a parochial school that was nearby. If I can find a map later, I'll show you. It was very close by. He said if we didn't have school on Pentecost Monday, he does remember that they wore their school clothes on that Pentecost Monday. So Pentecost was important enough that it was a 2-day celebration, that they decorated with greenery, and that the family would get together on both days of Pentecost. But it is pretty interesting to me that both traditions are so very closely related, and yet for both the Jewish and the Christian tradition, at least those coming from a German background, it's pretty obscure why each has happened. That doesn't mean that it's not valid. I think that these family stories are very important. And just in my own family, I can tell you that within 24 hours of my original email going out by private message to a distant cousin, many family members have been in contact with me, some who I really have never met, and have been interested in finding out more about this family tradition. But obviously, the ties of tradition sometimes go long beyond the story, so that what happens is that these actions, as we'd like to call it in seminary, the orthopraxis, the practice of the tradition, has long gone beyond the dogma or the faith's special meanings behind it. And so I find that to be a pretty fascinating thing. And in that sense, we're a lot more closely related than certainly some lines of Judaism and Christianity would like to admit. But it's just, to me, a real fascinating thing, and I'm grateful to have had this assignment, not only because it's just interesting, but also because it has put me back in connection with family that I haven't really been in touch with in quite some time. And as far as I'm concerned, that's kind of what God's all about, is that we are in a community of friends, of like-minded people, or a community of family that may or may not be in much contact. So I appreciate you taking the time to listen and to hear more about my family story and a little bit more about an obscure tradition that seems to at least have meaning for families, even though the meaning itself has been lost over time.